Hey everyone, and a massive welcome to today's what is the second episode of the CISO Experience here on Infosec Live, where we get to engage with and learn from the cybersecurity industry's leadership in a live setting with an open and honest debate. Sharing stories and best practices over the last few months has led to over 5,000 hours of our content being viewed on YouTube by over 2,300 subscribers, and has also qualified us to become part of the YouTube Partner Program, which this achievement unlocks other ways for you to show your support to the YouTube and Infosec Live community, gives you the ability to purchase super stickers if you want your question bumped up in the chat, and it also gives you the ability to purchase 3 tiers of membership, allowing you to show your support in any way that you can. But whether you join in or join even or not, being here and engaging with our content is what really matters. So for everyone who's tuned in already, thank you so much. And a massive thank you to our latest members the last couple of weeks, Aaron Lax, Alana Boyajian, Josh Copeland, Peter Element, and Kevin Apollinario. Your support is helping us grow the Infosec Live Scholarship Scheme and much, much more. And if you're watching this live, as always, please do like and subscribe. We try to make these events as interactive as possible, so make sure you do drop any questions in the chat. And when you do drop them in there, for my aging eyesight, please mark them with a big Q, just so I can spot them as well. It'd be much appreciated. You may have noticed an exciting change to the intro today, and I'm delighted to announce that the series has got a brand new sponsor, helping us grow and provide even more free and engaging content. So a massive thank you to Carl Matson, CISO at No Name, and of course the whole team at No Name Security for helping support our global community of approaching 4,000 cyber professionals. And for us, for the community, sponsorship is about partnering with the right organizations. And in my humble opinion, No Name Security is one of the only companies taking a complete proactive approach to API security, working with 20% of the Fortune 500, covers the entire API security scope across 3 pillars: posture management, runtime security, and API testing. It's a privately held remote-first firm who has raised 220 million, achieving unicorn status after only 1 year of coming out of stealth, which is quite some achievement. Link to find out more about how No Name Security can help your organization will be in the comments and will be in the chat. But now it is time to bring on our guest, and I'm very, very excited for the Down Under special we have today. We have Eric Pinkerton coming from Australia, and Eric has been breaking things just to fix them again since before he could walk. At age 20, he spent his summer evenings as a nightclub bouncer and read tarot cards during the day. I love that. Didn't realize it back then, but nothing could have prepared him better for a career in InfoSec, trying to predict the future whilst ducking those punches. And at only 9 years old, he was expelled from university when it became apparent that he had hacked the grading system, not to improve his own grades, but just to lower everyone else's. And he would have probably gotten away with it if he hadn't accidentally reduced his own birth date by 10 years. So we'll dig into that as well, Eric, I hope. And he cut his teeth as a technologist for the BBC World Service in London, where he learned the importance of educate, inform, and entertain. And he's also developed his passion for emerging technologies with a bent for security. And arriving in Australia in 2003, he landed an operational role at Australia's first IP telco and has since served hard time at Telstra, Stratsec, BAE Systems, Datacom, CSC, and Finally Hivint / Trustwave. And a regular presenter on the conference circuit, evangelizes a healthy level of cynicism, which we love, speaks about privacy, security, and the myth of infallibility in humans. And I'm sure at some point we might even get a chance to dig into his professional life today a little bit as well. But look, let's bring him on. This is going to be awesome. Pressed the wrong button then, didn't I, Eric? Meant to play a stinger then, didn't work.
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks for having me.
No, absolute pleasure. First spoke a few weeks ago, originally from the UK. Eric, understand?
Yeah. Everyone's going to be disappointed that I don't have an Australian lilt, so I'll apologise in advance for that.
Funny you should say that, but when I ran down to get my coffee, I said to my wife, I'm really looking forward to this. Eric and I got on really well when we had a chat before. I said he's been in Australia over 20 years. She said, can you tell? I said, well, the first time I spoke to him, I think it was a no. I think I have picked up a little bit, but we live in Norfolk in the UK, and we all go up at the end of our sentences and sound a bit Australian anyway, I think.
Yeah. I think everyone does now from growing up watching Home and Away and Neighbours. So
that's what it is.
But I do get accused of sounding like an Aussie when I go home.
I bet you do. So look, I gave a bit of background about some of the interesting parts of your younger life there. Tell me what got you tinkering with that tech, Eric. What got you first interested?
My father, probably. I'm starting to realize that the more that I realize the way my mind works, that my father was wired very similarly, and he was expelled from a number of schools, was always in trouble, was not academic, and when he left school, he went and joined the Navy and became a mechanic. And he was a bit of a savant with machines and the way they work. And to the point where, I recall him, a car driving past, and as it drove past, he said to me, "Oh, the tappets are on the way out on that car." Or another time I ran in the house and said, "I can't start my car." And he said, "Oh, you flooded the engine. I can smell it from here." So he had this ability to work with machines, but he was obsessed by electronics because when he'd been down in the bowels of the ship in the sort of in the tropics, sweating and holding a spanner, with a gauge like this, he envied the guys that were in the bridge with a tiny screwdriver, doing the electronics. So you must join the Navy and you must do electronics, was his kind of his dream for me. So of course, when I was very young, he enrolled me into the Sea Cadets and then bought me endless learn electronics kits. So no matter what I asked for Christmas, I got an electronics kit for
I can
Christmas
remember
every year.
those. I can remember those kits because I
Yeah,
got one
yeah,
myself one year.
yeah.
Yeah, with lots of little
So
lights and different switches and.
yeah, and I would sit there while he would play with them, and we do these little experiments and make crystal radios, and
It's like the Lego
and
I buy for my children.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's not. It's why you have kids, so you have an excuse to
very much
play with
so.
all those toys again, right? As you can see, I'm in my son's playroom,
Yeah.
as he likes to call it, but it's my office, and there's a big Venn diagram there. So that got me interested in electronics. Mechanics absolutely wasn't my thing, and to this day, what's under the bonnet in the car is just a black box to me. Uh, but then he became sort of interested in computers, and he bought a Commodore 64 again for him to play with, but under illusion that I was going to get to play with it at some
Did
time.
you did you put a
And
groove in the disc to increase the memory?
all we did, all of those kind of crazy things that we did. And it baffled him really. Computers just wasn't his thing because of his mechanical mindset.
Yeah.
And then as computers became more of a common thing and he started using them in his business, I was the one that was drafted in to help him fix things when they weren't going right. And I do recall getting home from university one day to find him in his office with his computer and bits, and his naval toolkit out beside him with spanners and oily wrenches, and I was sort of like, "What are you doing, Dad?" And he's like, "Oh, the hard drive was making a lot of noise, so I've put some WD-40 on it." So, but it was him. It was him that got me interested in technology and computers, and that's what sort of took me towards a course in IT when I left school. I wasn't particularly good at school. They got me doing computers at school, which I excelled at. It was the only thing in school that I did excel at.
Did you actually?
Um,
Because we're a similar age, I think, aren't we, Eric? Ish, right? Did you actually have a teacher who was capable of teaching you computers when you were at school? Because I remember it was our geography slash PE teacher slash computer teacher who used to deliver the training for us.
Yeah, no, I was quite lucky in that we had this chap called Mr. Hallett, and he was this big sort of, I remember him as having this massive beard and sandals. He was a proper,
Teacher.
kind of hippie guy, and he really did have an interest in computers, and he kind of took a shine to me because I was a little bit different to everyone else, and we used to kind of spar a little bit. We used to, wind each other up a little bit, and at the time he had I don't I can't vouch for how savvy he was, but he wasn't. I don't look back and think, oh, he was completely clueless. In later years, I did end up with computer teachers who knew absolutely nothing, especially when I was at college. There was, and not by virtue of knowing nothing, but by virtue of not having done the subject they were teaching for
And
20
also
years.
not having any interest, and that shows, doesn't it, with a teacher? I look back to school to the
Yeah, yeah.
subjects I enjoyed, and it wasn't necessarily the content of the subject that I enjoyed. It was the delivery, wasn't it? It was the engagement that you got.
Yeah, so I think everyone has one or two teachers that they recall as having that, interest in them, and whether those teachers are the same for everyone, or whether there's just
It's
a chemistry
individual.
between you and
Yeah,
certain teachers. They
yeah.
see something in you, and they take that extra time, and they set you on the path. And there was a few different teachers that they were few and far between, but that really got me interested in something. And
Yeah.
and here I am today. There was another teacher I had at college who was a real. I thought he was a bit of a wide boy, and he would teach us things that weren't in the pretty much threw the syllabus out the window and said, here are the things you need to know. And he would tell us some things that were very controversial and very, you couldn't get away with teaching it. I'm remembering saying that, if you ever start your own business, you should make sure you get a girl that answers the phone who sounds really sexy, because people will phone up to place orders just because, and it's not really something you'd find in a normal college syllabus.
Not
But
now.
all things that he'd learned over the years, and that he was anxious to pass on. So
He was trying to
he
impart his knowledge, though, wasn't he? That's what he was trying to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
he also, I remember asking him, what do you do if you apply for a job and there's 100 other people applying for the job? And he said, oh, just fib. he said, he said, if you honestly think you can do the job and they're asking for something specific, then tell them you've got that thing. And, by the time they realize you don't actually have that thing, you'll have already wowed them. And it was, I kind of took it with a pinch of salt, and I didn't go and tell people that, I have a medical degree when I don't. But
You get caught out
it,
quickly that
for
with that
for
one.
instance, in the infosec world, if you're applying for a job, there's often requirements that are put in there that are unreasonable.
Yeah.
There's a great story about the guy who was being interviewed, and they said, you said you've only got 4 years experience with this particular tool, but we quite clearly said in the advert we want someone with 6 years experience. And he said, well, I wrote that tool 4 years ago, so good luck finding someone who's got 6 years experience. So so that you don't get grepped by recruiters if they want a particular thing. And sometimes it's because that job description is populated by the person who's leaving and has been there for 10 years, and they ask him what he does, and he writes a list, and then that gets copied and pasted into a job description.
Yeah.
And you don't recruit a person who's the same as the person leaving. You have to find someone who's going to grow into that role, especially in the midst of a skills crisis. So sometimes you have to be, when you work at McDonald's over the summer, you write down that you were a grill chef in an international restaurant. So you have to gild the lily a little
All about
bit. And
framing, isn't it, Eric? It's all about
yeah, yeah,
framing. I
yeah,
think though it's relevant to people who are looking for jobs at the moment. And there's some research that came out a couple of maybe 3 or 4 months ago now with regards to the difference between how men and women approach applying for jobs. Back to what your college teacher said, well, just fib. And I'm not saying
yeah,
just fib, but and this isn't a sexist comment, this is based on research that men will tend to, if they've got 50% of the skills available, I'll apply for that. Whereas women are a little bit more conscientious in their approach, where they'd want to feel comfortable that they could do at least 70, 80 first. And it isn't just a sex thing, it's clearly a mindset thing as well, isn't it? Depending on what type of person you are. But again,
yeah, yeah.
learning to not take a chance, but maybe go out of your comfort zone might be a route to get a job, perhaps sometimes.
Yeah, it's a stat I read and was unsurprised by, and I've certainly had, you know, women in the industry that I've, told you need to back yourself a little bit. You need to, you're competing with people who are going to gild their lily a lot more. Uh, but I think that, there are all these other pressures that they feel under. They don't want to talk themselves into a job they can't do and then let
Yeah,
the side down. They're conscious that if they, as a woman, get a job, that they've, you know, they feel like they're punching above their weight, and they then fail, then that kind of muddies the water for other women coming in their footsteps, which is a real shame.
yeah.
But it's probably a realistic scenario. Unfortunately, we do have these some subconscious biases, and yeah, it's I can see how it happens, but I
You do. I
agree,
mean,
we
it's like
still need to work.
imposter syndrome, isn't it? You hear about imposter syndrome in the industry
Yeah,
all the time, and I
yeah,
don't know if that's down to personality types or whether it's down to the fact that you're never going to know everything in this industry because it's too broad, and the more you think you will, the
uh,
more you're kidding yourself.
yeah. There's a guy called Liam that I follow on Twitter, and he said something that I thought was absolutely hit the nail on the head, which is if you haven't got imposter syndrome in this industry, you've got Dunning-Kruger, which is, once you start believing that
Yeah.
there's something for you to learn, then you've kind of jumped the
And
shark, and
then you're the
it's,
problem, aren't you? Is what you
yeah.
are. Yeah.
But one of my recent epiphanies has been that the skills crisis itself, we don't even all agree that there is a skills crisis. It's a really weird thing. But I think that a large problem, people frame the skills crisis as there's just not a lot of people who understand cybersecurity, who get that, who have that right mindset. So, all the people in the industry are struggling because they haven't got that pool of people to reach in and help them. When in fact, I think possibly the larger problem is all of the people who are currently in the industry who are punching above their weight, or who think they understand it, or who are pretending to understand it. And what they're doing is creating even more work for those of us who are in trying to fix things. Because I'm often called in as a consultant to help organizations, and I look at where they're currently at, and I have so many questions like, why have you spent money on this? Why have you got that? Why are you trying to do this? And that's, what that does is it makes even more work for those of us of who are left. And what's interesting is that whole dialogue about the imposter syndrome. I've seen so many talks, and almost everyone that I respect in this industry has crippling imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So there are all these talks where we say, don't worry if you feel like you don't know what you're doing. We all feel like that. And I wonder whether the people who actually don't know what they're doing are listening to those talks and reassuring themselves it's okay. Everyone feels like this. And it's kind of
I
like,
hope
no,
so.
there
Yeah.
are unfortunately people with imposter syndrome that are imposters. And how do you solve that? I don't know. It's
There's
yeah.
lots of experts on social media though, isn't there? I mean, that's not a syndrome though. That is just imposter. I think that's different.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
let,
My
let me
goodness.
let me just jump in the chat and say thanks to a few people who've jumped in. Raven, thanks ever so much for jumping in. Salunio, I see you in there as well. Yuri, all the way from Ukraine. I know the electricity is a huge problem over there at the moment where you are. So thank you very much for tuning in and taking the time. It's much appreciated. Gregor says he wants an outro with me dancing because I missed the other one. I could probably do a little jig for you, Gregor, but it's not going to be any more than that. Druva's in the house. Rebecca, who else have we got? I think that's about it. And Druva did mention here, where is it? That he had, here we go. I thought this was quite funny. We had a CS lecturer who asked us for help in programming, going back to what we were talking about earlier. That did make me chuckle a little bit. But yeah, so thank you very much for jumping in. It does make a huge difference. And if you have got any questions, please drop them in the chat. But for now, I'm going to go back to the topic of people in cybersecurity in respect of people, process, and technology. And you mentioned that you do consultancy work for firms. From the limited experience I have speaking to companies, there seems to be an awful lot of focus on the technology part with different tools plugged in here, there, and everywhere and layered on top of each other. But the bit that I think that is missing a focus at the moment is people. So I'd like to know your opinion on the people problem in the industry and if you think there is one.
Yeah. So the view I've come to after years and years of doing this is that cybersecurity is 100% a people problem. Absolutely every single breach comes back somewhere to a mistake that somebody's made. And I remember trying to wrangle that people process technology kind of triangle a few years back, and what I came up with was my own brand new triangle that I call PayPal Foo. So PAE, PAL, PFU. PAL is sorry, so PAE is people are evil. So they're out there. There are people that are the hackers, the script kiddies, the APTs, and they want to get your data. They want to monetize that. They want to, steal your secrets. But they're relatively benign on their own, unless you have these other people on your payroll or somewhere in that supply chain. So PAL, people are lazy. People are, myself included, naturally quite lazy. If we can find a way to automate something, if we can cut a corner, if we can do something quickly, we are going to take that shortcut. And then PFU, people make mistakes, right? To err is human. We all make mistakes. And then there are other kind of things that layer on top of that, which lead to the same outcomes, right? We're distracted, we're undertrained, we're inexperienced, we have got other things going on in our lives, all of which lead to shortcuts, errors, mistakes, right? Now, what we tend to do in cybersecurity is we focus 80% of our efforts on this idea that people are evil, the Chinese are coming, the Russians are coming, but we have no sphere of influence over what those people do and how they act. And we sort of take our eyes off the fact that these people are within our control, these people that are on our payroll that are indolent and error prone. And if you think about the security controls that are in place that try to prevent those mistakes, or you think about defense in depth as a concept. So even if someone makes some mistakes, it shouldn't matter because we have a
Yeah.
peer review process, or we have, multiple layers in the DMZ, or we have code review to make sure nobody makes a mistake, or we have pen testers to come in and just make sure that the developers haven't not thought of something, or we have firewalls that are really a band-aid solution to crappy application
Mm.
programming. So once you start framing it through that people layer, now the mistake people make is they reach that conclusion that it's all about human factors, and then they think, well, if it's all about human factors, the solutions are around awareness or training. And of course, for the same reason, you can't make up all of those gains. Just we can't security awareness our way out of this problem.
No.
So technology is the answer to that. So using technology to corral people into doing the right thing, or process, that defense in depth, that peer review process, that oversight process, that multiple making the attacker jump over those multiple hurdles. That's where the magic kind of happens. And the easiest analogy is a password, right? If I give you the option of choosing a password and I tell you you must choose a good password, but I don't stop you choosing the name of your dog, a lot of people are going to choose the name of their dog and somebody's going to guess it, or they're going to use the same password they use over and over again. So we have a technical policy in place that knocks it back the first time you try and use the name of your dog. It pushes back and says, no, I want 8 letters and a special character and an emoji
Yeah.
and a squirrel noise, whatever. But if you go too far with that, then you sort of that chaos
Down.
theory that you've got this nice graph and suddenly somebody just writes it down on a piece of paper and sticks it to their monitor, or comes
Yeah.
up with some elegant way to get around it. And you've made yourself too secure and then insecure in the pursuit of doing that. And we see that all as consultants. We often, sometimes we're there to actually raise somebody's security posture, but there are times I go in as a consultant and the effect is that I have to lower the bar because they're actually making it they've made themselves too secure and they can't get any work done. Security can be a drag coefficient on your business, is the fancy way of saying it. So if you make yourself too secure, if you make your secretary have to scan her iris every time she comes back from the bathroom, she's going to hate her job, and
So
and
everyone's going
yeah,
to become inefficient as well, aren't they? As
yeah,
well.
it is. So you have to get that balance right. There's some really cool work by the Canadian Transport Board, which they did in and around sort of air traffic mistakes and errors, and they mapped all of the human factors that lead to problems, and I think they called it the dirty dozen because there was 12 different things. And if you look at them, there's things like norms, that's the way we've always done it, or people being distracted, or people being um, you know, doing a job that they're not used to doing. If you look at all of those things and then you look at them through the lens of what we've been through with COVID, with working from home, with all those extra stresses, you can kind of sort of see how human factors have been playing more of a part in some of the issues that we've had very recently, I think.
Do you think?
It's
Do you think the whole migration to working from home has brought a whole load of problems with it as well in itself? Then, because you've gone from protecting a network that's known, maybe in physical location, to then protecting however many thousands of networks you've got where your employees are at home with. I mean, look at my house. I've got 6 children in this house, 4 of
yeah,
whom will be on devices right now. My 14-year-old son, who's just come back from football training, I dread to think what he's clicking on a daily basis because I've, well, okay, I
yeah,
know what he's clicking on a daily
yeah,
basis, and it's concerning.
yeah. It's absolutely resulted in changes and a lot of different things, and a lot of things that are left field. I think it's contributed to the sort of skills crisis. It's allowed people, to work from home, and we've started to see the specter of people having 7 different jobs
Yeah.
because they're able to, create sort of smoke and mirrors and do that. So there are all sorts of different things. What I think it's done is it's accelerated the natural progression that we were on by about 10 years. So I think we are now where we would have been in 2035 had COVID not happened, in terms of, people not going into the office every day, people working away, people overseas doing, there's this, we've gone through a little bit of a honeymoon where in Australia, everyone's just moved up the coast because they can buy a much cheaper house, they can live by the beach, they've got a much nicer lifestyle. And if they're only having to commute once a month or once a fortnight, then they're happy to spend 3 hours in the car, because it's much less painless than it was when they were commuting every day. But of course, that is if you take that to its logical conclusion, why pay Australian prices for somebody who doesn't ever come into the office when you can pay
Outsource it.
someone in Manila to do just
Yeah.
as good a job. So I think we've got that to come, and to sort of come over the next few years. And I think we'll see the same thing that we saw with outsourcing of call centers, the great hokey cokey of, insource, outsource, insource, outsource. And,
Rah, rah, rah.
these people that walk around the industry championing, oh, you must outsource. This is our thing. You outsource it. Something goes wrong. It might be nothing to do with the fact that you've outsourced, but it might look like it's because you've outsourced. So suddenly someone else will come in and say, no, 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 it's all about bringing it back onshore. The telcos in
Bring
Australia.
back control. Bring back control
Yeah,
within. You don't want
yeah,
to
yeah,
outsource
yeah.
it. Yeah. Again,
And
framing, isn't it?
yeah, so it is absolutely fascinating, and it's a fun thing to kind of observe,
I think that
and
I think that
all the
the
security
industry's a
problems that
fun.
arise.
It is a fun thing. I mean, I suppose from a layperson's point of view, which is mine or perspective, the industry is definitely heavily weighted on the vendor front at the moment. There's nearly 4,000 products in the market that probably do 15 things, I reckon. And again, consolidation will play a part over the next few years. You're already seeing action in that space now. We've had all this VE and private equity and VC money come in. I'm not sure what impact that's going to have moving forward. I mean, I think as an industry, we're fairly sheltered perhaps from the potential effects of the economic downturn, although I am concerned, especially with the smaller companies, are still yet to, I suppose, embrace security at all. They're the ones who are going to be hit hardest when it comes to budgets. So it concerns me that we're going to leave lots of doors open in the smaller businesses moving forward. Where do you see the threats from an economic point of view?
Um, it's I'm always trying to look into the future and come up with views on what's going to change and how it's going to happen. And sometimes there are obvious things that are going to happen. I sort of, the way I look at this sometimes is, somebody invents the black and white TV. It doesn't take a genius to predict that the future will involve a color television.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of, every December LinkedIn fills up with companies doing their annual predictions for the next year, and we've all had a crack at doing that, and we talk about the things we get right and we never mention the things we get wrong. And it's often interesting to go through and look at the people who are predicting the absolute givens, the things that are, everything on the blockchain and ML, machine learning will match with automation and put us all out of work kind of stuff. And then there's the really kooky left field stuff that somebody just has this idea that this is all going to change. I remember thinking that ransomware was going to drop off
Yeah.
dramatically,
I saw that.
and it
I
kind
saw
of
that prediction
happened.
actually for next year earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I don't think it will, and even if it does drop off, the people who are making a lot of money from ransomware are not. If for instance one of the theories is, oh well, if governments start banning the payment of ransomware, then it will make people stop paying, and those ransomware will have to go off and do something else. I don't think they're going to go off and get legitimate businesses. I don't think those people are going to suddenly open a coffee shop. They're going to find other ways to make money, and it might not be ransomware. It might be business email compromise, or it might be something else. So
Well, it's no
another thing,
different. It's no different. Sorry, let me just jump in before I forget. It's no
yeah,
different to street robberies, is it? Street robberies historically used to be give
yeah,
us your wallet, give us your wallet, give us your phone. Now it's
yeah, yeah.
unlock your Bitcoin wallet, son, and transfer it to this number. It's again.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean that's a good analogy that I saw this with the um, car crime in the UK. So you'll know when you were a kid that the amount of kids that were stealing cars and joyriding was off the dial. If you walked into a insurance company and said, "Hey, I'd like to insure my, XR3i," they'd laugh at you because the
Used to happen,
insurance
though.
for a single year would cost more than the value of the car. Because
Yeah.
I had a friend who had I think it was an XR2i. He went into a police station to report it had been stolen, and they said, "What is it?" And they said, "It's a white XR2i." And he said, "We've had 11 of those stolen last night." And he said, "What XR2is?" He goes, "No, white ones." It was off the dial. So people stopped buying those cars because they couldn't afford to insure them, which made the car companies have to come up with more elegant ways to secure them. So along came smart keys and immobilizers and those kind of things. And it became quite difficult to hotwire a car. So what happened was people stopped stealing cars and people started stealing car keys. So they would put a stick with a coat
Through the
hanger
letterbox.
and
Yeah.
hook the keys, or they would jump in at the window of the petrol
Newspaper under the
station.
door. That old trick. Drag
Yeah.
it through. Knock
So
it.
what happened is as the technology got better, people became the weakest link in the chain,
Yeah.
and so the crime didn't the number of cars being stolen probably went down a little bit, but the impact of the crimes being committed was kind of even higher. And that's exactly what happened with computers. As Windows XP started getting replaced with Windows 2000 and Windows 10, and the level of security in those platforms was much better. It was much harder to learn. I learned to hack on Windows XP, and it was very easy. As it became harder, suddenly people became the weakest link, and we see this jump from technical exploits to social engineering. So I think that water finds its own level, and that's what we'll see with cybercrime. It is a very big business. It's not going to disappear. There is no technical solution out there that's going to be a silver bullet that's going to make all those people suddenly,
And
return
again,
to
when there's risk transference, when you can take out an insurance policy who are going to pay out. I mean, again, it's encouraging companies, isn't it? A little bit.
Well, there are bound to be organizations that say we can insure ourselves, therefore we don't need to spend money on security. It's a cynical view, but it's certainly, I'm sure it's happened. However, what's happened in ransomware is it's increasingly difficult to find or afford insurance that will cover you from ransomware attacks.
Yeah.
And if you do, the insurance companies are making you jump through all sorts of hoops in order to get that. So, okay, if you want to, yes, we'll insure your car, but you need to park it on the street and only do 20 miles a week, and
Have this
you
black
need to fit
box
this
sub under your bonnet.
camera in. Yeah, and
Yeah.
and that's what we're doing with security, which has led to this other problem, because now insurance companies are these honeypots of information
Yeah.
on the
Who,
inner
who are
workings
you
of
going to try and hack?
organizations.
Yeah.
And we've heard attackers being interviewed and saying that the first thing we do is we go for the insurance companies, and then we find a list of their clients and how much they're insured for. We go through all their clients one by one, and when we finish, we go back and ransomware the insurance company itself.
Wow.
So now it's when
Scary.
the insurance company is asking you to open your kimono and give them all of your pen test reports and all of your technology landscape and all of your policies, it's less attractive.
And again, Lloyd's came out a few weeks ago with regards to nation state attacks as well, didn't they? Exclusions around that. Do you think
Well, we've
is that going to be easy to prove?
we've we've been waiting for this to happen for some time. That's another prediction we've had, which is all insurance companies have a carve out for acts of war. Is it?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. In
trying to
every
think of the right
policy. Yeah.
terminology.
Yeah.
Now, if a ransomware crew comes out in support of the Russian government, does that make their actions, can you kind of join those dots? So as the escalation kind of increased in the Ukraine, in sort of March this year, the Conti Group came out and made a statement in support of the Russian government. Now, most of the industry insiders like me took one look at that and thought, well, that's not as much Conti saying rah, 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 Mother Russia. It's more likely someone in that organization was invited out on the balcony for a chat. And that was the result. But then what happened was the Conti Group included affiliates in Ukraine, because a lot of those groups they look a bit more like Uber Eats
Yeah.
than a normal organization. There are all of these, riders who are doing the donkey work, who get a payment at the end of the month. Is some researcher in the Ukraine apparently dropped their chat logs, and really that led to the whole thing being disbanded and probably renamed and started up again. And there were all these stories about ransomware crews being arrested, and finally some of the conversations between Putin and Biden had come to fruition, that the Russians were now rounding up all these ransomware operators, but actually it was more political, and what they were doing was rounding up the Ukrainian members, and they were tossing people off balconies, probably, who weren't playing ball with them. So of course we start to see some of those crews saying, oh yes, we absolutely support what Russia's doing, because it was in
They
their
don't want to
interest
be
to do
thrown off
so.
the balcony. Yeah.
But will that then lead to an insurance company saying, well, they're now a Russian organization, they're subject to sanctions, you can't give money to them, we're not going to pay you? And it's got to happen. If you've ever put in an insurance, I'm quite cynical about this, if you've ever lost luggage on holiday and put in an insurance claim, you will know there's a whole floor of a building somewhere that is dedicated to people whose job it is to try and weasel out of making a
Eric,
payment.
I spent 25 years in the insurance industry, and I could not agree with you more.
Yeah,
They've got more employees, investigative employees, and employees trying to get out of paying claims than they have anything
yeah.
else. Yeah,
Yeah. So they call it claims adjustment, right? And and
that's it.
and most people are savvy. And I read a statistic once, which is that more Samsonite luggage is reported stolen each year than is manufactured, right? So it's because everyone knows, well, if I put in a claim for my luggage, they're going to adjust it. Therefore, I'm going to mention that I had
I'm going to bump it up. Yeah,
Tutankhamun's death
two
match in my
MacBooks,
luggage
four
when it was
mobile
lost.
phones. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me
So,
jump in the chat, because we've got a few questions in there. Although Rebecca says that her son says she should live in a Faraday cage. I'm not far beyond that.
tinfoil hat is the
Tinfoil hat is the way forward. Yuri,
aluminium.
actually, talking about Ukraine, Yuri's based in Ukraine, not far from the Belarusian border, actually. And he's got a question. How do you think, is there a lack of people that have good skills in electronics in cybersecurity industry these days? I mean, I suppose relating back to your dad a little bit there. And for people who have, let me reframe that question a bit, Yuri. For people who have got good skills in electronics, is there a good career for them, and is there enough of them in the industry?
That's an interesting question. I know people who in the industry who dabble in electronics. So there's a lot of people who, are soldering boards for things like software-defined radio.
Yeah,
Most of the pen testers have got
they all have a little
we
lab playing away with
Raspberry
it.
Pis and soldering irons. However, if you look at the quality of their soldering, it's not very good. Lots of, they're not shiny joints.
Yeah.
I know people who've moved from the electrical engineering industry into cybersecurity because there are more roles and there's more money to be made. And I think the ongoing trend with electronics is, if something isn't working, you throw it over your shoulder and just get a new one because it's so cheap. So um, it's a hard question to ask. I don't know. There's this whole kind of
What about
journey from.
IoT side? About the
So
IoT testing?
IoT is different again. They tend to be electricians rather than electronics people. So most of the people who do IoT, they are, high voltage electricians, and they think about everything in those terms. And there's all this I call, air gapping in the IoT industry. I think is like the tooth fairy that I stopped believing in it a long time ago. Every network I've ever looked at that was purportedly air gapped wasn't, because there
Wasn't.
was some cable that was put in by Jeff 3 years ago with a label on it, please do not remove. So and then there's the idea of testing in the IoT world. You can't really just go in and start pen testing. What there is a real shortage of people who understand those two Venn diagrams. If you draw those Venn diagrams, people who understand OT and who understand security and testing and those kind of things. There's a real shortage of those people, and of those people, there are a lot of people who are doing daft things like you know insisting that air gapping is still a thing, or coming up with plans to penetration test IoT networks. And it's kind of risky, and IoT is now becoming this much bigger thing. It used to be industrial control systems. Now, I did a really interesting engagement for an investment bank where they said, we're interested in our sort of OT technology. And I immediately thought, well, they're worried about their HVAC systems and their lifts and their SCADA and so on. But actually, what they were interested in was this ballooning shadow IT of things like Alexa devices sitting on people's desks,
Yeah.
or iPads stuck on the wall outside a conference room, or video conferencing kit, and it pretty much the scope was anything that had an IP address within that organization. So I came at it from three different directions. One, we did some sort of network scanning, so very high level networking scanning of all the IP ranges that we knew. We did some floor walking to look for wireless devices, Bluetooth devices. The next thing we did is looked at procurement. So we went and looked at what we could find, people putting in expense claims for things. What were they saying that they were buying? Any sort of technology related expense claims, could we figure out what they were?
Samsonite suitcases.
Yeah, and Samsonite suitcase. Well, I've bought some device that has an IP address that does something, right?
Yeah.
Then there was the sort of asset list. So what do we currently have? And of course, they were three completely separate things that didn't cross over hugely. And the idea was to try and map the three things. Well, there's the thing, and then we did a floor walk. Then we actually walked around the business and tried to eyeball, what is that device there? What is that? That's got an Ethernet cable in it. What the heck is it? And by kind of bringing all those different things together, you started to realize that there were all these really weird edge cases. So we found that there was a lawyer who had an Alexa device. I think he might have been using just a one of those little Alexa pucks on his desk, because he'd found that there was an app within the Alexa kind of ecosystem that was written for lawyers, where at the end of the week, when he does his billing, it would give him an idea about what he was working on down to sort of 3-minute increments of the day. And he sort of said, it's not great, but it's better than trying to go through your calendar to figure out who you
How
need to
many
bill
minutes
for
you
what
spent?
you're doing.
Yeah.
But what that meant was client privilege legal conversations were going off to some data center in the US, and they weren't particularly punching the air about that. But so this is where that has gone, and it's only growing. And now that has dispersed to the four winds with the working from home. So if you think about an organization trying to come up with and understand all of those different things, it is getting bigger by the day. And I've got Alexa devices all over my house, even though I'm a security nerd and a privacy nerd. They're kind of fun to have, and they're useful to have. And
Well, I think
occasionally
you know how they
they're
work,
off
though, right? You see,
benefit.
I used to have a whole house full of hue color changing light bulbs. We had 125 spotlights that all changed color. We had Ring doorbell at the front, Ring camera at the back, all this other stuff connected. That was before I went bankrupt and lost everything a few years ago.
Is that why you went bankrupt?
Yeah, that's probably why, all the bulbs. But it was they weren't cheap, actually. But no, my point is, since then, whilst I'm not a multimillionaire anymore, I'm certainly not bankrupt or that skint, but I've got no interest to connect my house up like that ever again. I think the difference between me and you there is that you understand how it all works. I'm brutally aware that I don't. And I think having a little bit of
Yeah,
knowledge scared the life out of me, Eric, if I'm honest.
well, it's true. And if you know people that are pen testers, you'll often find, I laugh at pen testers because they always put a piece of electrical tape over their camera.
Yeah.
And I think it's for me, it's that your what I say is that your worldview is shaped by your experiences.
Yeah.
And if every day you're hacking organizations and you're doing red teams, and you know how easy it
Going to
is
be a
for you,
paranoid wreck.
you start to think that everyone is doing that all the time, and you
Yeah.
start to think that you have this mindset that's very different.
I suppose it's
And
no
for
different
me,
to my wife's father, who's a retired policeman who looks at everyone in suspicion.
yeah, for
You know,
sure, right? So and again, I've got this analogy where I say, if you ask your mate, who's a copper, what's the best alarm system to buy? He takes you to the burglar alarms. And if you ask your mate who's a fireman, what's the best alarm system? He'll take you to the smoke alarms. It's what they're used to seeing. Now, why it's funny for me is because if you think about that conceptually, an elastoplast or a piece of sticky tape over your camera, what you're saying is that, if somebody was to take control of your computer, they can look at your keyboard strokes, they can look at your files, they can listen to your microphone, they can see what's on
God
your
forbid they
desktop,
see your face. Yeah.
everything. But where you choose to draw the line is them looking at your face while they do it, right? So what on earth are you doing in front of your camera that's
I
and,
think
and
we all,
really
I think we all know the answer to that, Eric.
So when I see those electrical tape on there, I think you're either a pen tester or you're one of those people who's got that email. Remember the scam that was like, "We've got footage of you and we're going to upload it on Facebook."
Yes. Yeah.
It's one of those things. So I think the fact that I understand how it works probably means I probably shouldn't have those devices all over my house. But I'm a pragmatic person. I understand the likelihood and the consequence. And look, I understand enough to know that they don't send everything I say off to a data center and analyze it, just because it would be prohibitively expensive to do so.
Just the interesting bits.
Yeah.
Another question. Let's have a look. Rayburn, you talked about security controls, ACL policy standards, and company does everything right. What percentage amount of incidents are caused by human error? Yet all these policies are in place still. So
So the percentage of incidents caused by human error, I believe. Well, I'll start by saying, so there was some research the other year, I think it was Boston Consulting Group, where they said 80% of issues are caused by human error. And I thought that number was wrong, because the number I think is 100%, or maybe 99.999% as human error. But if you drill down into the 20% that they didn't think was human error, they were things that I think are human error. So one of the things they said wasn't human error was the procurement department buying the wrong thing. Well, what is that if it's not a human error? So it's not where this gets muddy. There's a few things this gets muddy. One is the idea of sort of malicious insider versus an insider who just makes an innocent error, right? So I often do tabletops and we talk about, somebody's done something, are they a malicious insider? And people are really quick to go, oh yeah, we'll get them in a room and waterboard them until they confess. And there's a thing called Hanlon's razor, which is never a tribute to malice, that which is easily understood by ineptitude. In almost all cases I've seen, those types of malicious insiders, really it's just an innocent mistake someone's made, or they've been socially engineered. Lost my train now. The other thing is the human errors that can happen. Maybe the person who's sitting on your payroll in your office, but it may also be someone who works for a supplier way down that supply chain. So you buy some software that was written by a programmer who was having a really bad day, and he made an error and didn't sanitize those inputs, and then someone else whose job it was to test it didn't really have enough time in the scope of their testing to test that particular thing, and so on and so on and so on. And eventually a human comes along and figures out, the evil person comes along and figures out that if you do that and you do that and you stick an apostrophe there's this really weird thing that happens, and you can then take that and run with it until you can get something you want to happen that the other company doesn't want you to happen. So if you think about the number of humans that are involved in between, someone sits on the toilet and has a light bulb idea, between that person and the person who's holding something in their hand as some cool tech, there are, designers, there are developers, there are hardware people, software people, firmware people, there are procurement people, there are implementers, there are operators, there are all these different people, and every one of them will make mistakes, and every one of them will cut corners. It's just the reality of being a human.
It's back to what you said earlier about having a peer review process in place, I suppose, isn't it?
But a peer review process is not a silver bullet, right? You still, for instance, penetration testing is a good example. So the idea of a penetration test, really, it is a belt and braces thing to make sure that nothing else has slipped through the cracks. So when you build a system, ideally you build that system, you have design review. all the way through that process. You design it on paper, you start to prototype it, you build it, you have other people doing oversight, looking at it. You might have third parties come in doing an architecture review, a design review. Then you have policies for all those different things. All those are leading up to the point where the penetration tester shouldn't find anything because all the homework has already been done. But penetration testers always find something, right?
Yeah.
Now, an attacker has as long as they want, and they only have to find one thing in order to get that foothold. A penetration tester has a very limited amount of time, and they have to try and find everything. Now, that penetration tester might have 2 weeks. He might have scoped that test as 3 weeks, but the companies come back and said, well, actually, we looked at the budget and we can't afford 3 weeks of testing, and we only have 2 weeks left before we go live. Can you just do what you can in 2 weeks? So time box testing. So now
Yeah.
he's only got 2 weeks. He'd prefer to have 3 weeks. Really, he might need 4 weeks to find all the things, but he's going to try and do his best in 2 weeks. He gets in there. The first day he can't test because the accounts haven't yet been provisioned, so on. So it gets constrained and it gets constrained. And also, he's now realized on day 3 that the whole back end of this system is an Azure database that he's never really used before. It's not his area of expertise. The guy that is working on something else, and so on and so forth. So now you've got errors that are slipping through the cracks, even though people are doing all the best right things with the best intentions. Even with no malice. Now, malice can then slip in where the project manager's budget depends on the project being finished on time. So he damn well wants to make sure nothing is found by the pen tester. So he makes sure it's now only 1 week of pen testing. So all these other things, and this is all human factors that lead to, somebody in Russia managing to get a whole bunch of, sensitive data on mega.nz and can then start extorting you.
It's amazing, isn't it, how many pieces there are to the puzzle when you put
Yeah,
it like
it's put another way, it's an absolute wonder that anything works.
Yeah, Drew has just said, I was going to say, when I was working for penetration testing company, the amount of firms who used to mess them about with regards to the times that were booked in. And you hit the nail on the head, about projects needing to be finished on time. You can see it clearly from the outside looking in what these people are doing. We can't do that week, but it's got to be done by this date. Can you come in next Thursday? And it's just,
Yeah.
again, how do
It's
you
tricky.
get around that?
And I've seen people playing passive aggressive, games where, they'll write a pen test report and they'll add a load of constraints that, whilst this was booked for 2 weeks, we only actually did 4 days of testing because, this wasn't ready and this wasn't ready and that. Because it's, that pen test is going to be used as a get out of jail free card for the project but we tested it when it inevitably gets compromised down the road. So
Yeah.
scoping a pen test is a really tricky thing. It's finger in the windy as.
Yeah.
How much time do you think this needs? 1 week or 2 weeks? You feel
No
it in
idea
your
until I
order.
start looking. Yeah.
And think about this. So when you get a pen test, often you'll go out to 3 or 4 firms and you'll get 3 or 4 quotes. Each one of those firms has to scope that test and give you a proposal, and you're probably going to go with the cheapest one, and it's probably
Yeah.
going to be the cheapest because it's the smallest scope, right? So when you're scoping, you're in your mind as a consultant, you're always thinking, well, how much do I think this
How much will
piece of
they spend?
technology needs, and how much do I think they will spend, and
Yeah.
how do I kind of have that conversation with them, which is, look, I don't want to be the most expensive quote, but I want to caution you, if you go with the cheapest, they're probably not going to include, you're not comparing like for like.
It's like my
It
grandmother
is.
used to say, all fur coat and no knickers, Eric.
Yeah.
Drew has mentioned, Drew has been a member of the community for some time now, and congratulations, Drew, on starting your job as a penetration tester, by the way. Just finished university degree, straight in there with a job. So yeah, congratulations. But they get 5 to 7 days for a web app pen test and then yearly retesting. I think that from the firm I've been working with recently, that's pretty normal, I think. Does that give
Yeah,
you
well,
enough
it's always
time?
going to be at 5 or 7 days in my experience, because it's a nice round number.
Yeah.
But there will be times when you will sit there after day 3 and just go, what am I going to do now? Because it's a static HTTP,
Yeah.
there's nothing in there, or it's static HTML. Or there will be times when you look at something and you go, wow, I've got 5 days to test this. I could easily spend 6 weeks on this. So
Yeah.
then you go, well, okay, well, how do we make the best use of that time, and how do we insulate ourselves by the fact that we don't actually feel like we've had enough time. So you put into the report either constraints, or you put, you put a recommendation that the next round of testing is longer, or that focuses on the thing that you haven't had time to really give scrutiny on. It's
Yeah.
it's a more of an art than a science.
Or as Drew said, or if it's a huge app, you get 5 to 7 days for a web app, but it depends how many lines of code there are in there and what else is
Yeah.
it, doesn't it?
And sometimes you go into it, to somebody scopes the test with the best intention. You go in there to test it, and you start pulling the thread, and you're kind of like, hang on a minute, what's all this stuff? Oh, that's out of scope. And it's like, well,
Don't worry about that.
there's a poster that there's a conference in New Zealand, and they used to have posters that were quite famous, and one of the enduring posters was this whole bunch of checklists, and it's hackers do not give a crap if, and it's like, it was out of scope, all these common excuses that organizations come up with, for the reason testing wasn't done, or we don't test in the dev network, or we don't test in prod, or it's like the hackers don't care about any of that stuff. They're still gonna get in there and start seeing what they can see, and pulling on threads, and mapping things together. And
so I suppose you can do the best you can, can't you? But there's always going to be holes. There's always going to be gaps. So I suppose to finish off, I mean, we've run out of time, but I want to get you just to summarize that. I suppose we see a lot of people going out there spending budgets on tech and other bits and pieces before doing maybe some of the basic stuff. For some of the smaller organizations out there who might be watching, who want to start taking security seriously, the first exposure they tend to get of it is either the insurance company telling them, or being told that you need a pen test to get insurance for this, or it's driven by regulatory concerns or rules and regs. What would your advice be to those smaller businesses on where to start?
Again, it's a big question. I tend to think of security as being on a maturity journey, and what you want is to be a little bit better tomorrow than you were yesterday. So it's this continual journey, and you can't go from a 0 to a 5 overnight. So 0 is a startup in your mum's basement, and you've only been going for a couple of weeks, and there's no security, as it should be, because at that point that's not your issue.
No.
And as you get investors and you employ people and you build systems, you want to sort of up that maturity level. And often there are sort of sticks and carrots to get you there. And the stick might be investors insisting on, you've got to fill in this report, which asks all sorts of curly questions. And often that's the point you reach out to a consultant and say, hey, we've been asked all these questions. If we answer them truthfully, we'll never hear from these guys again. How do we answer these? How do we go through these questions and either decide this, we need to do something right now. Here's a way we construct our answer in such a way as it doesn't make us look like we're not taking this seriously, which is, we are moving towards, we are doing these things. There's all sorts of things you can do quite cheaply and quite quickly, and there are things you absolutely can't. And we use risk it's a bit of a, it's not the most elegant thing, but risk is the way that we try and percolate the things that we need to do today, versus the things that we can afford to put off tomorrow. And you then need to construct your rationale for why you've put something off until tomorrow. Well, the reason we don't have that in place is because we actually focused on this, so that when somebody comes finger pointing in the event of something bad happening, you've got that rationale and you've covered your ass, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense.
Woolly consultative answer.
No, it's not. I mean, again, you hit the nail on the head. You can't go from a 1 to 10 in 5 minutes. And I think the problem is that the world we live in, everyone wants to get to 10 tomorrow, irrespective of whether that's a company or an individual. And you could have the same argument on, the frustrations from some of us who tried to break into the career and it took quite a long time. But to have anything robust and that's going to work, it takes time to build it up.
So on a more practical example, get as much as you can in the cloud. Typically, Microsoft can do things better than you ever will.
And they've also got a suite of security tools that help you as well, haven't they?
Yeah. All that stuff is getting easy for the sort of common man, but also multi-factor auth on everything that will allow it have that, and that makes the attacker's job much harder.
And make everyone go back to the office and stop working from home.
Yeah, I think you'll just lose your staff if you do that, and you'll be in an even bigger mess.
I think you're right. Although, maybe it's my age. I miss going in an office a little bit. I wouldn't want to go in 5 days a week, but I do. I think
You'll be in there with all the other boomers and all the really young kids who live with their parents who are trying to get away from home.
That's what it is, isn't it? But then you think about, I mean, I know I said we're wrapping things up, but think about through your life, the relationships that you've built up through working with people. I'm not to say you can't build up the same relationships online, because I've showed over the last year that, you know, I've developed some amazing friendships with people all over the world, but I still think there's always going to be a place in my heart for face-to-face networking.
I completely agree. I think that as a when I was a consultant starting out, everything I learned from watching other people work in the office, and also innovation and ideas comes very much from those little serendipitous conversations you have waiting in the watercolor in the lift. What are you working on? Oh, you should talk to Steve. He's the expert in that. Or that's Steve. Do you know that that's his hobby?
Yeah.
And you go and talk to Steve, and Steve's like, oh, that's amazing. I'm doing that. And it's all of those cool, innovative ideas. Once you take everyone apart, you can lose that unless you come up with some other way to try to get that working. And nobody wants to sit through Zoom cocktail parties or Zoom award ceremonies or anymore. We're done with that.
That was nice for a year, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So when I saw you in your jacket, I was feeling a bit underdressed. I was trying to fish out a thing I printed out. I did a virtual awards ceremony, which was all over Zoom. It was hideous, but I printed out this little tux and cut it out so I could sort of stick it on my keyboard and then sort of rest my head on it, and it looks like I was wearing a dinner jacket as long as I didn't move.
I've got two suits that fit. Both of them bought within the last year. This one for a job interview a few months ago, and a black one, which is my funeral suit, because I'm at that age now where people die all the time and you need one. But other than that, I think, you know, for me, working in finance, a suit to me is as comfortable as my tracksuit. I mean, it has got stretchy material in it, let's be honest, so it, you know, it moves all right, but I'm as comfortable in this as I would be my joggers. And I think, again, it's what you're used to, isn't it? And what you're comfortable in. But yes, it does make me an old git. I know that.
We can't go back to the office in our stretchy pants.
No, we can't. I think we're going to have to finish on the stretchy pants comment. I think
COVID has made all my clothes shrink.
Yeah, me too. Eric, it's been an absolute pleasure. Before we go, a couple of things. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's been in the chat asking questions. It always makes it more engaging and interesting. And personal one for you, Eric, massive thank you for taking the time at what is now 8 a.m. On Thursday. I think you're a day ahead now. And I have set up.
I'm in the future.
Sorry, say again.
I'm in the future, which is why
you are in the future. It's amazing. I've also set up a LinkedIn group, a private group for the CISOs who've been on the show. There's only one rule, and that's no sales pitches. So I'll extend you an invitation to that. It's just my way. My only skill set, Eric, is connecting people. And I thought, we've had 24 of you on the show now. Why not set up a little group for people to get together? So I'll send you an invite to that afterwards. And for everyone else, I'll play the right stinger now that I should have played when Eric came on. Seeing as we've got a sponsor, they're going to want to see their stinger. So I'm going to play it for you, No Name Security. And thank you so much for your sponsorship. Eric, thank you for your time. Audience, awesome. See you all soon.